So, kia ora koutou, ko Amelia Sharman taka ingoa. My name is Amelia Sharman. I'm Director Sustainability Reporting here at the XRB. And today I am joined by Ricky Owen, who is a Project Manager in the Sustainability Reporting team. And we're going to be talking to you about the draft climate reporting roadmap, giving you lots of information about the proposals and the consultation process and the areas that we're seeking feedback on. So the focus today is really about information sharing to help you understand the draft roadmap and how to respond. Please do put your questions in the Q&A function. We will get to them throughout the webinar, and any questions that we don't get to, we'll aim to come back to you afterwards. And as I said before, the slides and recording of this will be made available on the XRB's website. So let's get into it. We're going to cover three things today. Firstly, the proposals in the draft roadmap, what we're proposing and why. Secondly, the information that we're seeking through the consultation process. And then thirdly, how the consultation would run and how you can provide feedback. We're not seeking feedback yet during today's webinar, but we're very happy to answer any questions about the document and the process, and any comments that you have, please do put those in the Q&A function. We'll start with the proposals in the roadmap. The section of the webinar is going to explain the proposed direction for climate reporting in New Zealand, the key drivers for change, and the principles underlying the roadmap itself. The draft roadmap sets out the proposed what, why, and when for climate reporting in New Zealand. Importantly, it is a strategic proposal. It's not a final decision, and nothing is changing while the consultation is underway. Aotearoa New Zealand climate standards continue to apply unless and until decisions are made following the consultation. And then after the consultation, we are intending to issue a final climate reporting roadmap. So that will sit there as a, not a draft, as a final document that everyone can see for their periods going forward. Why are we issuing this draft roadmap now? There is a significant evolution in climate reporting internationally. Many jurisdictions are adopting or using International Sustainability Standards Board, or ISSB, standards. And as most of you probably know, Australia has already legislated a phased climate reporting regime using those ISSB standards. We got fantastic feedback from our request for information on the international alignment of climate reporting. And the three key messages we heard were: one, a desire for international alignment, particularly with Australia; two, a bit of stability, please don't change anything immediately; and then and a phased approach to change. We also heard a demand for recognition via regulatory mechanisms. That is the remit of the regulator. So FMA here in New Zealand and ASIC in Australia, happy to answer questions on that as relevant, but that is the remit of the regulator rather than the standard setter. And then finally, a key other change happening in New Zealand is the change to domestic settings, which is the proposed changes to the definition of a climate reporting entity in Part 7A of the Financial Markets Conduct Act 2013. So the draft roadmap is aiming to respond to these drivers and set a proposed direction for the next phase of climate reporting here in New Zealand. The draft roadmap is based on three principles. The first is international alignment. And in this context, we are therefore proposing adopting the ISSB's standard, IFRS S2, climate-related disclosures, as the basis for a new climate standard here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. The second principle is harmonisation with Australia. So we will consider how New Zealand should respond where IFRS S2 differs from Australian requirements. And I'll get into what some of that detail is later in this webinar. The third principle is local relevance. We are keen to consider what modifications may be needed to IFRS S2 so that an NZ IFRS S2 would work well in New Zealand. And then these principles are intended to support the XRB's overall strategic direction of standards that are internationally aligned but fit for purpose in New Zealand. I'll get now into a bit more detail about those three principles. First principle is international alignment. So in practice, this means adopting IFRS S2 together with the climate relevant portions of IFRS S1, which is the general requirement standard that they have. IFRS S2 has been endorsed by IOSCO and adopted or planned to be adopted by about 40 jurisdictions. We consider that adopting IFRS S2, particularly for the changing cohort of who is a climate reporting entity here in New Zealand, will help to keep New Zealand climate reporting internationally comparable and credible. We also consider that it will provide a clearer future state rather than making piecemeal amendments to NZCS, Aotearoa New Zealand Climate Standards. We did hear a demand during that RFI process for international alignment rather than necessarily adopting a new standard, but they are written in quite a different way, and we are conscious of negative unintended consequences by making those piecemeal amendments. So yeah, the idea is a clearer future end state using an NZ IFRS S2. And while we do expect there to be some transition costs, we do expect the benefits of that international alignment for climate reporting entities to outweigh those costs. The second principle is harmonisation with Australia. And as I said before, RFI, that request for information feedback, identified Australia as a key jurisdiction for New Zealand to consider. Harmonisation is designed to support more comparable climate information across the trans-Tasman market and also to reduce duplication for entities operating in both countries. And therefore they can enable shared systems, processes, and expertise. We can also learn from Australia's experience with their implementation of their standard, which is called AASB S2. At the same time, we do know that our starting point is slightly different. Climate reporting entities do have experience of reporting under NZCS, so we're not starting from scratch. So that is one consideration in terms of that harmonisation process. And then finally, the third principle is local relevance. So an NZ IFRS S2 would start from IFRS S2, but include modifications where needed for New Zealand. We will have to consider technical amendments that may be needed to fit with New Zealand's legislative and regulatory settings. So, for example, in the primary legislation here in New Zealand, it specifies that the assurance is over greenhouse gas emissions disclosures. So just as we've done in NZCS, where we have a scope of assurance section, we anticipate having to need to do that in an NZ IFRS S2. But we're also aware that further modifications may also be considered to reflect New Zealand reporting practice and market context. For any modification beyond those technical amendments, we would need to identify a compelling reason. And the aim, to really focus on those compelling reasons is to ensure that the standard is as aligned as possible while ensuring it works in New Zealand. Ricky, do we have some questions?
Yeah, first questions come in just building on that and going into a bit more detail. Do we have any sort of early thoughts on what those local modifications might be or might relate to?
Sure. So, we need a compelling reason. So, we are very, very keen to hear any views during this consultation process on what some of those might be. In the consultation document, we do talk, for example, about local modifications that other jurisdictions have made. A key one that many jurisdictions have made is to either eliminate or make optional something called the SASB standards, which are a series of kind of metrics that the IFRS S2 standard says you must consider. So some jurisdictions have taken those out. Australia has taken theirs out. And other jurisdictions like the UK have said they are a may consider rather than a shall consider. So that's something we know is definitely on the table. But we are also very, very interested to understand if there is a compelling reason that any of our stakeholders can identify as to whether any IFRS S2 requirements should not be included, whether any requirements from NZCS should be retained and added. There is a difference kind of between additions and removals and modifications. But we want to really know about any proposals for all of those three types of amendments.
Thanks, Amelia. Next question, and stepping back a bit, what does the XRB think about fully adopting IFRS S1, recognising the consultation acknowledges the need to adopt parts of it for the purpose of S2?
So in New Zealand, the XRB has a mandate to issue a climate-related disclosure framework. So we can only issue a standard relating to climate. So we are unable to issue IFRS S1 as a standard that would go beyond our legislative mandate. We could consider, as Australia has done, issuing that as a voluntary piece of guidance. The XRB has the mandate to issue what's called non-binding guidance on non-financial reporting. But we have considered at this stage, we do not anticipate doing that. Other jurisdictions have incorporated the elements of S1 into S2 to make it workable as a standalone standard in different kind of technical ways. And we are very open to looking at the different ways that other jurisdictions have done that to see what works best in New Zealand. But if you have a strong view about whether we should issue S1 as a piece of voluntary guidance, please do let us know in your response to the consultation.
Thanks, Amelia. And one more has just come through. Please advise on the considerations for any changes to the CRE definition. Is it likely that the FMA proposal to increase to 1 billion for listings will be enacted, or will we align to Australian definition which relate to revenue, assets, workforce?
Okay, so the WHO as a climate reporting entity is decided by the government. So that is a decision that's made in the primary legislation. It's not made by the XRB or the FMA. That legislation is sitting there on the order paper waiting to be passed. And it doesn't propose changing the way a climate reporting entity is defined to match the way a climate reporting entity is defined in an entity is required to report in Australia under their Corporations Act. The way the entities are required to report the classifications is different in Australia and New Zealand, but that is definitely a decision for the government, not for the FMA or the FMA or the XRB. But yeah, that legislation. We do expect that to pass, but that is a decision for the government and for the Parliament to make.
Thanks for that. Great questions so far. Keep them coming through. Definitely common themes there that we've heard before. So back to you, Amelia.
Thanks, Ricky. And so the final kind of key element of the roadmap, the draft roadmap, is the timing. So we are proposing issuing this new climate standard called NZ-IFRS S2, and our proposal is to issue that on the 31st of August 2027. And by doing it by that date, it would then be available for early adoption for reporting periods beginning on or after 1 October 2026. So that would be our 30 September year end. Entities could pick that up for early adoption should they so wish. However, we are proposing a reasonably long transition period because of what we heard during the RFI to please have stability and a phased approach to change. So that mandatory application would only apply for reporting periods beginning on or after 1 January 2033. During the transition period, climate reporting entities could continue applying NZCS, or they could elect to early adopt NZ-IFRS S2. But if you do elect to early adopt NZ-IFRS S2, you cannot later revert back to NZCS during that transition period. So it's a one-way shift from NZCS to NZ-IFRS S2. But that NZ-IFRS S2 would not be mandatory until reporting periods beginning on or after 1 January 2033. All right, so that is the description of the proposals in a nutshell. And what I'm going to now get into is the second part of the webinar, explaining the consultation questions and the information we are seeking. Consultation is so important for us because it helps us to understand your views and gives us the supporting evidence that we need to make the decisions. The first consultation question is the big one. It says, do you support the proposed strategic direction? So a reminder that direction is internationally aligned, harmonised with Australia, and locally relevant. We're interested in your overall view on this question, but also any reasons you have and any supporting evidence. And feedback on this question will help determine whether the XRB proceeds with the roadmap as proposed. The second question talks about benefits and costs. We do expect the benefits of the draft roadmap to outweigh the costs. So we've got some potential benefits like improved international comparability, support for access to overseas capital, and simplified compliance for some climate reporting entities operating internationally. There might also be access to a broader range of expertise, support services, and reporting systems, as I mentioned before. We do know there are expected to be some costs. So one-off transition costs, such as updating your systems, processes, etc. And some climate reporting entities may face increased ongoing costs because IFRS S2 does contain more detailed disclosure requirements, which I'll get into soon. And we are seeking further information on these benefits and costs. So any information you have on that, we are really looking forward to. Ricky, more questions?
Yeah, just related to the timeline and probably a good time to bring it up now. In terms of the timeline, FY33 seems very long to have inconsistent disclosures in the market. Has the XRB considered risks involved in such a long time frame?
That is absolutely why we're asking a question on what people think about the time frame. So yeah, we are very aware that changing from one reporting standard to another can be a challenging process depending on the entity. There are risks, and as you mentioned, in terms of different disclosures. However, the standards are very aligned already. So we don't expect there to be significant inconsistencies in that period. And I can get onto the similarities and differences in the next slide. I'll do that now. So there are similarities and differences, but they are substantially aligned in many areas. Both are structured around the TCFD pillars, the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, and they have very similar concepts of materiality, and they have the same definition of primary user. So it should be that, the information is material for that existing and potential investor, lender, and other creditor. The governance disclosures are also very broadly similar, although IFRS S2 does include more detailed disclosure requirements. The main differences are in areas such as strategy disclosures, scenario analysis. It requires a resilience assessment. There are different value chain considerations, different metrics and targets disclosures, and different requirements around greenhouse gas emissions measurement. IFRS S2 also includes explicit what are called proportionality mechanisms around undue cost and effort, for example, whereas NZCS relies on much more of a principles-based approach and the targeted relief, which was in the NZCS2 standard around adoption, so giving time before particular requirements were necessary. So what we are looking for, and the consultation document goes through this information in more detail, and there are a lot of comparison documents, etc., that we link to in the consultation document to explain these differences. So what we are seeking information on is what do these differences actually mean in practice? If you are an entity that operates in both the New Zealand and Australian market, we're particularly interested in your views because you might have practical experience of both, or you're a professional service provider that actually has worked with entities doing both. From a primary user perspective, we really want to know whether adopting IFRS S2 would improve the climate information that you rely on to make your decisions. And we also want to know which disclosures matter most to you for your decision making. From a climate reporting entity perspective, we want to know whether any IFRS S2 requirements should be removed, changed for New Zealand, or whether there should be anything added that isn't in IFRS S2 that is in NZCS right now. So we're really, really keen to understand at a practical, detailed level if you have that information to hand. There are also differences between IFRS S2 and the Australian climate reporting framework. And so this is relating to that principle of Australian harmonisation that was the second principle I talked about earlier. And there are two key areas that are relevant to this consultation. One is industry-based metrics, and the second is scenario analysis. The Australian standard, AASB S2, does not currently require entities to refer to that SASB-based industry guidance that I mentioned earlier, but Australia does intend to finalise mandatory industry-based requirements by 2030. So that's another factor leading into that transition period to 2033. So we know that Australia is going to be aiming to publish something on industry metrics by 2030. We want to see what that looks like. The second key difference between IFRS S2 and the Australian framework is that the Australian primary legislation requires a climate resilience analysis using two specific temperature defined scenarios. So that is different to in IFRS S2, it doesn't specify those temperature defined scenarios, and it's different to NZCS where we require three scenarios. So we are seeking your views at this point in the consultation on how New Zealand should approach these Australian harmonisation points. For example, is it more important to you to align with Australia versus aligning with the way the IFRS S2 standard is written? Or, is there any other information that you can give us around your views on Australian harmonisation? And then finally, to relate to that third principle on local relevance, our objective is to issue an NZ IFRS S2 that is fit for purpose for New Zealand while remaining as aligned as possible with IFRS S2. We are unique here in New Zealand in that we are not starting from scratch as all the other countries that have adopted S2, but we are transitioning from existing domestic standards. And we know that climate reporting entities and their advisors have had 3 years of practical experience implementing NZCS, and primary users and other stakeholders have also had the same period of time reading climate statements prepared in accordance with NZCS. So, as I said, we are expecting to have to make some technical amendments to fit with New Zealand's legislative regulatory settings. We cannot issue secondary legislation that is inconsistent with primary legislation. But we are also asking whether any other changes are needed because of New Zealand reporting practice or market context. I explained earlier a legislative or regulatory setting can relate to assurance. I'd just like to point out here that the assurance requirement is not proposing to change as a result of this draft roadmap. So the assurance scope is set in primary legislation. It covers the greenhouse gas emissions disclosures only, and we are not proposing any change to the minimum level of assurance, which is limited. But in terms of that local relevance modification on the reporting practice and market context side, they may affect whether a climate reporting entity can state compliance with ISSB climate requirements. So we do need to consider them carefully, and we are interested in any views you may have on whether stating compliance is important to you. Entities will have to state compliance with New Zealand climate standards, so that NZ IFRS S2, but how important is it, that wider issue of stating compliance? There is a section in the consultation document about that. And I think this slide just really explains that compelling reason for any additions, removals, or changes is really what we need to understand. And a relevant consideration for a compelling reason can include cost, practical difficulty, usefulness of information to a primary user, and whether the change supports the purpose of climate reporting in New Zealand, which is a statutory purpose in Section 19B of the Financial Reporting Act. So that will be a very important consideration for the XRB the whole way through any consideration of locally relevant modifications. And then finally, getting to the timing. So thanks so much, yeah, for the questions. We are seeking your views on the proposed implementation timeline. We do know it is a proposed quite long transition period, um, and that NZCS would remain available during that period. The transition period is intended to give climate reporting entities time to develop capability, to update systems and processes, and prepare high quality disclosures. We think it's really important that you do have a look at that IFRS S2 standard to see the detail in it, um, to understand the potential implications of those changes, and then that will help you give feedback on your thoughts on whether this proposed transition period is long enough, um, too long, or not long enough, for example. So there's a whole lot of information in the consultation document about that. But just to confirm, we would issue the climate NZIFRS S2 standard next year. It would be available for early adoption, but it wouldn't. The proposal is not to require mandatory application until 2033. Ricky.
Just a confirmation question here. A CRE has to adopt the new standard in full. Can't be a hybrid part of disclosure rely on XRB part on IFRS.
That is correct. You must apply one standard. So you are either applying NZCS, or in the transition period, you are applying NZIFRS S2. And once you start applying NZIFRS S2, you cannot revert back to NZCS. So yeah, absolutely, it's one or the other. Okay. And so here is just a reminder about how you can provide feedback. We really encourage you to respond in a way that works best for you. You can, we're doing a series of feedback forums or written, you can reply via a written submission. So consultation closes at the end of September. We are organising virtual and in-person feedback forums, either organised by the XRB or via industry bodies. And you can also respond in writing. Written submissions are sent to sustainability@xrb.govt.nz. You do not need to answer every question. You can respond to any or all of the questions that are relevant, but it's really important to note that the final roadmap will be shaped by what we hear through this consultation. And as I said before, that practical experience, if anyone out there has practical experience implementing both NZCS and AASB S2, we're really keen to hear from you, because that is that on the ground experience, which is so valuable. And just a point I really want to emphasize is we do strongly encourage stakeholders to engage now on the substance of what could be included in a possible exposure draft of NZIFRS S2. Because if feedback supports the direction in the draft roadmap, we do intend to consult on that exposure draft. We're proposing quite a short consultation period for that exposure draft so that that NZIFRS S2 standard could be made available for early adoption next year. So even if you don't support the proposed direction, so the answer to question one is no, I don't support it, we would still value your feedback if you have it on this other questions in the consultation document, or what you think we should consider if the XRB does proceed. And so that's why the consultation does get into some quite nitty-gritty questions around specific disclosure requirements. We're just very, very keen to get your views at this point. And we're up to questions. Ricky, any more questions?
Yeah, one more here touching on the timeline. What is the intention for reviewing standards and publishing guidance during the transition period? Will the XRB still focus on NZCS or shift to IFRS S2?
That is a great question. Okay, so our proposal is that we would not make any more amendments to NZCS once the NZIFRS S2 is issued and available for early adoption. As some of you may know, we have a currently open consultation right now on some amendments to NZCS to enable better international alignment, and that is related to greenhouse gas emissions and finance emissions in particular. That survey is open for one more week. Please go onto our website, the consultations page of our website, and respond to that survey. We're super keen for your views. But that would be the proposed last amendment to NZCS. So then in terms of guidance, what we do aim to do is for guidance about how to do the process, underpinning the disclosure requirement. We do try to make that as much as we can disclosure standard agnostic, thinking about a way, not the way to do that process. Um, but we will absolutely consider whether any changes are needed to that guidance. And then we have a whole suite of guidance relating to disclosure requirements. Now, that disclosure guidance will remain available during the transition period. And then, in terms of the disclosure guidance relating to an IFRS based standard, we propose that we will likely do something similar to Australia, where we will make the ISSB's guidance available in New Zealand. So yeah, there will be disclosure guidance that is different because obviously the disclosure requirements are different. But yeah, we are absolutely keen on your views on what is helpful guidance from the XRB, what should be made available. But yeah, the goal is that guidance will continue to be made available for whatever applicable standard is out there.
Mm.
Okay, so thank you so much for your time. The point of this Q&A period, please do put any other questions that you have into the Q&A. We really want to make sure we've answered all your questions around clarifying the proposals in the consultation document, how you can provide feedback. If you have a question that you come up with after this point, please just do send it through to us at that sustainability inbox. And this recording and the slides will be made available on our website. There's also a webinar from the 7th of July that is already available on our website, and there's lots of questions that were answered during that one as well. I will just stay online for maybe a minute or so to see. Please get any question into the chat. Anything else you want to ask? And while I do, I will give a little plug on that consultation on NZCS1 on the amendment. We have a webcast where you can watch a description of what those are. The survey is a very short survey on our website. So please do give us your feedback on that. A climate alert went out today. If you're not on our climate mailing list, do please go onto our website and sign up. The alert today had some stories in it about the publication of the effectiveness evaluation of the climate-related disclosure framework. You can register to attend our next Sustainability Reporting Board meeting on the 3rd of August. And we are looking to publish very soon some guidance on anticipated financial impacts. And we're very grateful for the feedback that we've had, the technical feedback we've had on that so far. So yeah, do please go onto our website and subscribe to our climate alerts and also the XRB's main XRB update. All right, I think that's all the questions that we've had today. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you, Ricky, for joining me and helping to be a fantastic question MC. We are looking forward to your feedback on the consultation. Thank you again and have a great afternoon. Ka kite.